While the top Nazis were building a 1,000-year Reich, others implemented the insane plans of their leaders. But who were these people, and what were they really working for? Goebbels, the propaganda mouthpiece of Nazism, argued that everything was for the Germans and only for the sake of the Germans, as well as for the future of Germany. So, with examples, let's see what kind of future the Nazis were preparing for their fatherland and what they wanted to turn the Germans into. Dorothea. In the Ravensbrück concentration camp served a certain Dorothea Binz. She was an ordinary German girl who, after finishing school, joined an SS auxiliary unit. Many young German women did this back then. At first, she was just a dishwasher in the SS canteen. However, the young Dorothea had ambition and career aspirations. She was sent to train as a guard in Ravensbrück concentration camp. There, she studied successfully and quickly demonstrated to the authorities her considerable capabilities. At just under 20 years old, she became a guard in a concentration camp punishment cell. It should be noted that for prisoners, being placed in solitary confinement was equivalent to a death sentence. Rarely did they come out alive. Dorothea tried very hard to reduce the number of prisoners who survived the confinement, and her efforts were not in vain. The authorities noticed her, appreciated her skills, and in 1943 appointed Binz as deputy chief overseer of the concentration camp. Thus, in Dorothea's hands were the fates and lives of many thousands of prisoners of the death factory. In such a position, Binz went all out. The girl simply could not pass the prisoners without hitting them. For this, she always had a whip or a club, or just a stick, and always an angry dog. In a fit of rage, which happened to her quite often, she beat one prisoner to death with something that came to hand, a pickaxe. Additionally, Dorothea loved riding her bicycle, which she used to visit the location where the prisoners worked. She often ran into one of the prisoners as if by accident. She then burst out laughing. It was her own way to joke around. Often she ordered the prisoner to be brought to her in an office or an empty cell. Here, Binz locked her up, forced the prisoner to undress, and began to torture the unfortunate woman, beat her with a whip and tried to push a stick you know where, and committed other outrages. As she admitted in the close circle of her fellow guards, all these atrocities gave her a feeling of spiritual satisfaction. Irma. Another overseer, by the name of Irma Gries, who left her bloody mark in 3 concentration camps, Ravensbrück, Auschwitz, and Bergen-Belsen. She fully earned her nicknames, the Blonde Devil and the Beautiful Monster. The favorite activity of the Nazi executioner in a skirt was beating, dog hunting, and shooting prisoners. Just as Dorothea, she always had a whip and a hungry dog, sometimes even 2. The whip was made of her special order from braided leather. She always wore heavy boots, which she used to beat to death already fallen female or male prisoners. And yes, Gries also liked to torture men, although she was the warden of the women's sector. However, at her request, the overseers from the men's sector brought her male prisoners, whom she first undressed and then beat. She took a particular pleasure in grabbing men by the genitals, inflicting severe pain on them. She trained her hungry dogs in such a way that they would bite both men and women, as you can guess first of all their genitals. She found this very amusing. They say Irma slept with all the guards and overseers of the concentration camp in which she worked. Apparently, that also happened for the sake of spiritual satisfaction. Male wardens, many of whom were not known for their innocence and restraint, nonetheless referred to Gries among themselves as an insatiable bitch. Jenny Wanda Barkman, a former fashion model, decided to make a dubious career as a concentration camp overseer. Since January 1944, she served in the Stutthof concentration camp. The concentration camp was small, but Barkman still was able to develop her sadistic fantasies there. Just like the above-mentioned women, Jenny Wanda loved to humiliate the prisoners. She beat many of them to death. She also selected prisoners for the gas chambers. It was her choice whether a person would live another day or not. Apparently, this power over the life and death of people also brought her some kind of satisfaction. She could walk several times in front of the line of prisoners, pointing with her finger at the unfortunate prisoner she selected, which became a sentence for them. She would walk back and forth, slowly passing by the prisoners. Then she suddenly turned, pointing at unfortunate with the finger, and said, "Yo." For her, it was a kind of game and entertainment. Jenny was beautiful. She was known as the Beautiful Ghost. but frequently referred to as the deadly ghost, because she brought death to those she encountered. Elsa, the wife of the commandant of the concentration camps Sachsenhausen, Buchenwald, and Majdanek, SS Standartenführer Karl Koch, Elsa Koch was also a true Aryan and merciless to the enemies of the Reich. She was absolutely ruthless with all her enemies who were unarmed and completely defenseless before her and her husband. Elsa loved to rummage through the things taken from the newly arrived at the camp. As the first lady of the concentration camp, she could appropriate anything she liked. This way, she provided herself with expensive clothes as well as her husband and children, a true example of a caring and diligent German citizen and mother of the family. Elsa also loved being present at interrogations and torture of prisoners. Apparently, this also mentally excited her. She personally did not hesitate to humiliate the prisoners, and again, for some reason, she was mostly interested in the genitals of the unfortunate. This lady liked to cause the prisoners a lot of pain by physically affecting the victims' organs. Also, Mrs. Koch enjoyed products made of human skin. People even gave her a nickname, Frau Lampshade. They say that she personally took part in processing the leather taken from the prisoners. Maybe because of that, Elsa Koch had another nickname, the Witch of Buchenwald. Maria, the head of the women's section of the Auschwitz-Birkenau camps, Maria Mandel, called a monster, was responsible for the death of not 100,000 prisoners. Mandel was a melomaniac. It was on her initiative that an orchestra was created which greeted each new batch of prisoners with music. A good musician had a chance to survive in the condition of a concentration camp. Mandel housed her musician women in a separate section of the barracks where they were freed from all other work and fed well. The attitude toward the girls from the camp brothel was also more or less terrible. However, all the other prisoners were doomed to misery and imminent death. Mandel had another weakness. She loved to play with people like with animals. That is, she could bring closer to herself one of the prisoners whom she liked in some way. It could be a girl, a woman with a child, or a child. Maria Mandel began to take care of such a female prisoner or a small prisoner. She fed them well, dressed them beautifully, and went for walks with them. However, such a paradise for prisoners did not last long. When she got bored with a person, with an unwavering hand she sent them, at best back to the barracks, and more often than not, to the gas chamber. In such a vile manner, she acted with about 100 prisoners. Mandel ended her service as head of the women's sector of the Dachau concentration camp. Mandel was arrested by the Americans in August 1945. In November 1946, the Americans handed her over to the Poles at their request. In December 1947, a Polish court sentenced her to death. In January 1948, by court sentence, Mandel was hanged in Krakow prison. This list can go on for quite a while. We have reviewed only a few examples of seemingly ordinary women who turned into monsters.